In this segment, I want to talk to you about the Electoral College. If you're tired of laws or rules governing parties and elections, this is the last big one you have to go through. But they are important. The rules are important. Remember, going way back in the beginning of the course, I talked about how we have a constitutional democracy or a rule of law democracy. So the rules that govern our system are highly important. And rules are what we have aplenty when it goes to electing candidates. You can't say we're a democracy because we have majority rule, because without knowing what the rules are governing the election, you have no idea whether it was a majority, plurality, an extraordinary majority, or some other. You have to know the rules. And the last set of rules are among the most important rules we have. I have to talk about how we elect President of the United States using something called the Electoral College. The Electoral College has been with us from the very founding of the country. A series of reforms were proposed in 1800 because it was clear initially that they'd made a drafting error. But the Electoral College, in essence, has been with us from 1789 until today. And because it's so difficult to amend the Constitution, it's very likely to be with us for a very long time to come. That said, I need to tell you one other thing. If we were doing over it again, we'd never use the Electoral College. It has serious and significant dysfunctions to it. And I'm not happy to try to tell you about it, but I have to tell you because it is something that has the potential for a major constitutional crisis at some point in the future. Here's how it works, and here's why it was created. When it was created, it seemed like not a bad idea. The word college there is not a college like you go to college and study a bunch of courses. It's college as in the word collection. The word college is also used in the Roman Catholic Church when they talk about electing a new pope. The College of Cardinals elects the new pope if there's a vacancy because of the death or retirement of a pope. It's called the College of Cardinals, and we elect our president from an electoral college that names the president. And the word college for the Electoral College came from the College of Cardinals. That's where they got the name. Where else? They weren't particularly Roman Catholics, but it was an idea and a concept that seemed to work. Why did they do this? Well, they had the thought, first of all, that the first president of the United States was everyone's obvious choice, George Washington. They had no doubt that George Washington would be the first president of the United States. Some people thought that he would be the first president, and while he'd be elected for 4 years, he would just be elected again and again and again until he became, in effect, an American king. George Washington stopped that by saying, no, 2 terms is it, I'm quitting after 2, and forced us to become a presidential constitutional democratic system. But nonetheless, they recognized that Washington was likely to win the first election, and he did. Both of his elections were unanimous in the Electoral College. But then they said, after Washington, there's no one obvious, no one person who will be the unanimous choice in the future. And they were right. Instead, they thought what would happen is that each state would probably put up a favorite son candidate. And that favorite son would win that state, but then there would be, since there were 13 states, there would be 13 favorite sons. And how would you decide which of those favorite sons would go on to win? And they were not entirely wrong about that. They concluded then that if they were going to have a large number of candidates for president, they would have to have a way to winnow down the total. And that's where the Electoral College came from. They said, well, we'll let every state have a certain number of electors in proportion to their population. And we'll let them form an Electoral College and then cast ballots there for the election of a president. Eventually, the smaller state candidates probably won't prevail. Some of the larger states' candidates, because they'll start out with a block committed to them from their state, will probably win. But there are a number of large states, so it won't always be Massachusetts, or it won't always be Virginia, it'll be something else. And people will get to pick. So their initial idea was to use the Electoral College. It was structured in the following way. Every state would get the number of electors equivalent to the members of the House of Representatives. That would be based on population. Plus, every state would get 2 electors equivalent to the numbers of members they had in the U.S. Senate. And that's the way it is today. That's how we get at the total of 435. We happen to have 438 only because we've chosen to treat the District of Columbia as if it were a state for purposes of the Electoral College. So we have 538 voters in the Electoral College, and they cast the ballots. They have to cast the ballots so that there's a majority, not just a plurality, of votes in the Electoral College. They have to have 270 votes to win. If they had only 269, and there were 2 candidates with 269, they'd have a tie vote, and they would not have someone who won by a majority. The rules as they're laid out in the Electoral College call for the election of president to be thrown into the House of Representatives if there is a deadlock in the Electoral College. And that's the way it's written from the beginning. That's the way it operates today. We've actually only used it one time. That was in the election of Andrew Jackson, of John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson in 1824. But that's the rule. In that election, in the House of Representatives, each state gets only 1 vote. That 1 vote must be cast by all of the people from that state who are in the House of Representatives. Now, if it's a small state like, say, Wyoming, that has only 1 representative, well, he just cast a ballot himself. He caucuses in a phone booth, I suppose, and makes up his own mind. Actually, he'll probably vote whatever his party's candidate is. If it's a large state like California or New York or Texas, a large number of people are going to get together. And some of the states have evenly divided delegations of exactly the same number of Republicans or Democrats. And they might have a deadlock, so that their state's ballot wouldn't be cast. That's one of the problems with the Electoral College. Another of the problems with the Electoral College is not just the possibility of a deadlock, but the fact that the Electoral College will sometimes give you a wrong result. When I say a wrong result, here's what I mean. It will sometimes give a result where the popular votes go to one candidate, but the Electoral College votes go to another candidate. That's a characteristic of the single-member, single-election district system that we've talked about in class. And that comes from the fact that the single-member district, single-election system doesn't call for a specific predetermined result. So it is possible, using our electoral system, that we will produce a popular vote on one side, but an outcome on the other side. In American history, this happened only one time without some kind of hanky-panky in the rule-taking. That was in 1888, when Benjamin Harrison defeated Grover Cleveland. Benjamin Harrison got fewer popular votes than Grover Cleveland, but without any shenanigans on his part, he was the winner in the Electoral College. There were 3 other elections, all of which were marred by some kind of irregularity. The first I've already discussed in part when I talked about the election of John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson in 1824. Andrew Jackson got most of the popular votes, but he didn't get a majority in the Electoral College. The election was thrown into the House of Representatives. Once it got into the House of Representatives, all of the elite people on the East Coast were against Jackson. So they came up with a way in which the votes for Crawford and Polk were cast for John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams won. It was, of course, called a corrupt bargain by Jackson. He started the first 4-year campaign for president, and he just trounced Adams in the next election. And in fact, he made John Quincy Adams' life as president completely He attacked him on every issue that came up, and he was very devastating because he argued the election was stolen from him. There was nothing illegal that went on. Actually, the rules that followed by John Quincy Adams were perfectly good rules. And for political insiders, it probably seemed like there was no corrupt bargain at all. It was just ordinary compromise made by politicians. Happens all the time. Happened then, happens now. But Jackson made it an issue, and he managed to win with the issue. The second case occurred when Samuel Tilden ran against Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876. In that election, Samuel Tilden got most of the popular votes, but Rutherford B. Hayes was elected in the Electoral College. It was a problem, and the problem and the shenanigans developed over the fact that a few states submitted competing delegates, or competing lists of electors. Because it followed the Civil War, and because Union troops still occupied 4 southern states, there were 2 different elections held. In the case of the Southerners, the Democrat, Samuel Tilden, got the votes. In the case of people who were in office, supported by Union troops, the votes went for Rutherford B. Hayes. The question then became, which set of delegates were we going to take from states like Louisiana and Florida, where there was a division, and South Carolina. There were actually 4 states. If you looked at the popular votes, Tilden won. And if each of the states had voted in the electors as the popular vote went, Tilden would have won. But there was a question of whether you were going to accept the electors. And the Union forces argued that the elections held by the Democrats, won by the Democrats, had been unfair. In anticipation of the problem, the legislature had created a very unusual presidential system. It was a system in which the 2 houses named members to an electoral commission, and they were supposed to have an independent body in the end. At the last minute, the independent backed out, and they had to pick either a Democrat or a Republican. They chose what they thought was an independent Republican, but it turned out he was more Republican than independent. In the end, when the votes were taken in the Electoral Commission accepted elector slates that were all Republican, and Hayes won by 1 vote. This is a checkered history for the Electoral College, and it is one of the reasons why the Electoral College is such a problem. A comparable problem occurred in the year 2000. There was another close election. The Democratic candidate, Albert Gore, got more popular votes than George W. Bush. And it was not a close election. He won by more than 500,000 votes, almost 1 million, I think. He was very, very far ahead in the popular votes. But in one state, the state of Florida, the election was very close. There have been counts afterwards, recounts of this kind, that gave Gore a 54-vote victory. But it didn't matter what the recount was. The official vote, officially taken on the night of the election and declared, was for George W. Bush. While the state of Florida's rules called for a recount, Bush challenged it in federal court, carried it to the Supreme Court, and won a 5-4 victory in the Supreme Court that made the original election night total, not a recount, stand. And George W. Bush won Florida, and with the votes in Florida, he won the presidency, as Rutherford B. Hayes did by 1 Electoral College vote. This is a checkered history. The checkered history is based on a very curious collection of constitutional provisions and particular state laws. And I say again, as I did at the beginning, if we were starting over again, and we know what we know now, we would never never chosen the Electoral College. But you can't get rid